We'll call the Thursday, March 27th meeting of the Select Board and FinCom to order. First order of business is a joint public hearing on the annual town meeting and warrant. So is there a motion to open the public hearing?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Justin, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, sir. So you have before you a copy of the annual town meeting warrant for the upcoming Tuesday, May 13th, 2025 annual town meeting, which will, of course, take place at 7 o'clock p.m. at the Howe Manning School Gymnasium. For those joining us in attendance this evening, there are copies available up at the front of the table. If you so choose, it is also up on the screen up ahead. So we're just going to go through these on a high level, and I would ask that please reserve questions for the end of my explanation of the article, if there are any at all. So with that said, I will move forward. Article 1, under fiscal 25 and prior year financial articles, we have an article to hear committee reports. Article 2, pay bills of prior fiscal years. We have 4 bulleted items totaling in at $10,772.99, including a invoice from Catalyst for the assessor's office. Just under $60 from Rocky's Ace Hardware, insurance reconciliation of about $9,500 with Meld, and a Medicare application fee for the Board of Health totaling in at $709.
The meld, it's unusual and both in its subject and its amount. Did something peculiar happen?
A journal entry was booked for the wrong amount in May of last year. So because everything closed to free cash, I undercharged, I overcharged Meld, so we have to pay them back. So it'll just resolve itself by a journal entry after this is done.
Sharp eye. Article 3, fiscal year 25 snow and ice deficit. We are and remain to be right on the edge this time of year. Typically, but not always, we're in the clear, so we're going to leave that in place for now. Fiscal year 26 financial articles. Article 4, to approve the fiscal year 26 compensation for elected officials, which is a usual and customary article. There will be a supplement in the warrant book under Table A, highlighting those amounts. Article 5, the fiscal year 2026 omnibus budget, which is available, distributed this evening as a supplement, but it will be included in the warrant book as well. I'll pause at this point in time if anybody would like to call out anything in particular, or should we continue rolling through the warrant and we can take the budget afterwards?
Since we're at the budget, if anybody has any questions or comments on the budget, let's hear you.
Do you have a PowerPoint you wanted to throw up?
No.
Okay. So we had talked about high-level updates and changes since the last time we'd met. Is there anything?
I thought that was going to be during the operating and capital.
Sure. I'm just going to keep cruising, and we'll cover it at that point in time. Thank you. Article 6, fiscal year 26 public safety operating budget override totaling the amount of $975,000. Based on feedback we had received at the Select Board's meeting on the 18th, we did break out the salaries from the benefits line and then called out the amount of police officers being 3 and the amount of firefighter paramedics being 4. We also called out outside of salaries what makes up the remainder of that figure. So I'm just going to read it line by line. Town of Middleton, 3 police officer salaries coming in at $278,700. Insurance, benefits, equipment, training, certifications, and taxes relative to those 3 officers will come in at $111,300. The total compensation for funding additional police officers will come in at $390,000. For For firefighter paramedic salaries, you would see $437,800, and then the insurance, benefits, equipment, training, certification, and taxes would be $147,200, with the subtotal for 4 additional firefighter paramedics coming in at $585,000. Those two figures, the 390 for the police and 585 for the fire, total out for the grand total of the fiscal 26 public safety override at $975,000. Are folks satisfied with that breakdown? Thank you. Article 7, fiscal year 26 elementary school operating budget override. We have a total amount of $537,276 anticipated for that override, and an itemized list is to be provided by the elementary school administration sometime in the coming days. Article 8, fiscal year 2026 Masconomet Regional School District operating budget override, totaling in at $467,194. Similarly, an itemized list is to be provided by the Masconomet administration sometime in the coming days. We've had communication with them regarding that.
Can I say something regarding those two?
Sure.
I think the two committees should really take another look at combining those two. I think we have a much better chance of passing if they were combined. It's a similar total dollar amount to public safety. It's a lot easier. The public doesn't get into the numbers as much as we're asking for 3 overrides. I think it's easier to get 2 overrides. You're going to, especially for the elementary, if a family has kids that have already passed through elementary, but they're in Masco, especially for the elementary, I don't know why you wouldn't want this combined. I think there'd be a much easier passage of this if it were combined. It looks funny that police and fire are working together, it's combined, it's public safety, and then we have education, and they're separate, and you're pitting one school against the other. I think there's literally a couple of days left to make a final decision on that, and I think you should really reconsider. I strongly believe that it would pass much easier if they were combined, especially where the numbers are similar. It's just an easier ask for people to vote for 2 overrides than 3.
I would just add to that, the warrant is presently closed, and we do intend to go to print early next week.
So we have a couple of days.
Just to put an asterisk on it, though.
Right, but there is legally, there is a process, if that decision were made, within a couple of days, as I understand it, it could happen, correct?
We would have to post a meeting within 48 hours for the
To
board to open.
reopen
Yeah.
the warrant and then close it
Okay.
again.
Close the warrant, and then make the changes and get it out to print.
I think it's a worthwhile effort. If the school committees can get into agreement, it's worth the effort, and I think it would be a much easier pass, my opinion.
I appreciate the feedback. We did talk about this on Monday at our last school committee meeting. And I think the whole elementary school committee kind of agreed to keep them separate. With that being said, we haven't talked to any of the Masco school committee members, and, I hadn't heard any feedback from you guys, so I do appreciate the feedback. Are there any other suggestions from either the FinCom or the Select Board on having them split versus together?
The downside is a bigger number.
Yes,
Yeah.
and also the downsides if there could be an epic failure, if it fails, rather than one passing for.
So, I think, I had suggested to you guys that you look at that, issue. I think it makes, what makes an awful lot of sense is for you, for the two committees, to work together. And as long as you're working together, I don't think it makes much difference whether it's combined or separate.
Okay. Yeah, and we were clear on Monday that we do support the Masco override, all of us, but we did want to keep them separate. We do have a meeting on Monday at our public hearing. I can bring this up again, and Trevor, I don't know if you'd be able to attend with any of your other committee members, we could maybe have a discussion about it.
But if you bring it up
I mean, by Monday, it's too late, right?
Is
So,
Monday too late?
You would not be able to post a select board meeting to
Right.
open and
Right.
close in time to get to print.
I just think getting in the habit of this, it might work this year because both the committees are making the conscious decision to make some cuts, but if we get in the habit of this and one year committee's adding a couple positions and where the other committee's cutting a few, the stories are very different when you're trying to sell the overrides. And we're working with the regional school district, which adds another layer of
Another layer.
complexity. So I, for one, don't feel as though it's the best idea. But at the end of the day, it's the select board's warrant, so if this board chose to, we would.
Not advocated to
Yeah.
decide, but technically tomorrow morning, you could, we're supposed to be Tuesday.
Yes.
Anticipating their vote on Monday.
But, you know, the point is that, you know, it, for me, would only be done if, I would only
Right.
vote to combine them if both committees said,
Absolutely.
yes, we want.
Right.
that."
Absolutely.
Unanimous.
So, Trevor, you've expressed some
Unanimously,
reservations,
every
which,
school
you know,
committee
are
member,
very
just the two
understandable.
boards.
So, for me, that's the end of the story, as long, and I just urge both of you to work together, and I think that achieves as much as combining them.
I just feel as one member out of 11, I can't be the one to make that decision.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
4 members out of 11 of Middleton, I don't know if we can really make that decision. I think you need to take a regional approach to a regional school district.
Well, I think if the 4 Middleton members supported it, and the elementary school supported it, we would do it. We don't need a vote of the Masco School. If we had a consensus of the Masco School Committee members, I just truly believe it's much easier to advocate with them. It's hard to advocate for two separate, it's going to confuse people. I just think that's a much easier, if the goal is to get them passed, I think it's in both schools' benefit to combine them. That's what especially with the police and fire combined. You're asking people to vote for 2 overrides rather than 3. And that's, you know, we all know these numbers, we get in the weeds. The people don't, they just say, 3 override, 2 for the school? They might, I just, that's how I feel. I feel strongly about that, but
Okay, I
it's
get
your
what
call.
you're saying. If you want, Trevor, we can talk about this on Monday at our school committee meeting, and if it's not too much of a headache, and it is possible to have a meeting on Tuesday, if we do vote, or do agree to keep them as one. If we keep them as separate, then we would obviously need to have a meeting.
Correct. I spoke, after Costa brought that up, I did speak with our leadership team, and we were pretty bearing on the side of, we didn't think it was a good idea, but if you want to have that conversation on Monday, I'm more than willing to try to get there.
Just as a data point, that's literally nothing more than a data point, just to give you the lay of the land. In Topsfield, they've always been separate. That's just the way it's always functioned there. I'm not saying it's good, bad, or indifferent. And in Boxford, they're always separate as well. There's an article for the elementary, there's an article for Mascodon. So I say that for no other reason, just to give you the perspective of 3 towns. No advocacy one way or the other.
Okay.
Thank you.
Moving on, Article 9, fiscal year 26 community preservation budget, debt service projects and expenses. You can see the breakdown below in 3 categories of A, B, and C, with A making up open space, historic resources, and community housing reserves. B is the Flint Library debt service, and C is administrative expenses for the CPA, with the CPA total coming in at $314,599. Article 10, fiscal year 2026 community preservation budget new projects. So these are capital initiatives that fit within the mission of the CPA or CPC. So you'll see on here, there are 6 items totaling in at $178,260 to run through them quickly. Assessors, historic records digitalization, amounting in about $26,000. Open space and recreation plan update totaling in at $55,000. Rail trail improvements totaling in at $25,000. Planning, zoning board, historic records digitalization, $55,000. Time capsule, $7,000. Bart Brown Memorial Trail System, $10,000. Article 11, authorize fiscal year 2026 revolving fund spending limits. This is unchanged from the prior year, with $35,000 in the Council on Aging, $15,000 in recreation, and $5,000 in stormwater management.
I will say as a point for future years, within the latest bill that the governor passed, I forget what she is calling it, but there is an article that will, once you set those limits, you don't need to include it every single year unless you're making changes
They
to it,
just
similar to
follow
what they
through.
did for the bylaw. So that is, the governor has filed that, but there has been no action on that yet.
And that would be just a law, not a local adoption.
Right, and there's already the bylaw aspect to it, but at that point, it becomes part of your bylaw, and it's there until you make changes to it, similar to what they did back in 2017.
Thank you. Article 12, fiscal year 2026, South Essex Sewerage District Enterprise Budget in two categories, direct costs totaling in at $108,530 and indirect costs totaling in at $6,924 for a grand total fiscal year 2026 budget of $115,454.
So can I ask a question on that? The salaries and wages, that's paid, who is that paid to?
So that is the cost of doing the invoicing, so it's the treasurer collector, assistant treasurer collector, collection clerk, my salary. So it's like a percentage of each person's salary that gets funded from the Southern Essex Sewerage District Enterprise Fund.
Okay, so that
So it's
money
the-
actually so if we have a budgeted salary, say, for you, in the budget, part of it's really not what we're paying because part of it's paid.
It's all paid out of the general fund. There's a transfer that comes in from the enterprise fund into the general
Okay.
fund. It's a transfer in versus
Okay.
my salary being paid in 4 different accounts.
Okay.
Article 13, fiscal year 2026 water enterprise budget. Similarly, two categories, direct costs totaling in at $233,287 and indirect costs totaling in at $97,204 for a grand total of $330,491. Article 14, accept a sum from the Middleton Electric Light Department, otherwise known as MELD, this year totaling in at $260,000. And we thank MELD for that contribution. Article 15, transfers to reserve accounts. We have 5 separate categories this year. $100,000 for the OPEB Trust Fund, $250,000 for the Facility Stabilization Fund, $50,000 for the Stabilization Fund, $50,000 for the Pension Stabilization Fund, and $100,000 for the Capital Stabilization Fund, totaling in at $550,000. Once again, as discussed throughout the budget process, we have an unusually high year in terms of investment earnings in our free cash, and so we're looking to put that away. Article 16, fiscal year 2026 capital budget. And there's a full table on the other side. So go ahead and turn the page. I'm going to read the subtotals for each department rather than read them line by line unless anybody would like me to. So for information technology, we have a subtotal of $379,103. Town buildings, a subtotal of $1,075,000. Fire department, a total of $2,393,879. That includes a ladder truck. Building inspection, $50,000. Elementary schools, $275,000. Essex North Shore Tech, it's their capital assessment, $56,953. And the Department of Public Works, subtotal $747,060 for a capital project total proposed for fiscal year 26 of $4,976,995. Article 17, Masconomet Regional Capital Request. This is a $690,000 phase two of what was originally a $1 million list split proportionally between the three communities. That $1 million has since grown a little bit over the past year. Middleton's portion of that for fiscal '26 is $230,652. Article 18, litigation expenses for 3A MBTA zoning. We're looking to set aside $25,000 as this is an expected expense that is outside of our typical legal counsel contract. We are still workshopping a purpose at this time, given the sensitivity of that topic. We want to make sure we're particular with the language we're choosing. So I'll distribute something separately to the select board about that to get your feedback. Article 19, Middleton 300th Committee. We're proposing setting aside $15,000 in free cash to be expended under the direction of the Middleton 300th Committee for the purpose of planning and executing a 300th anniversary celebration for the community, which would occur in the year 2028. It's right around the corner. Article 20, Charter Review Recommendations. The Charter Review Committee has come forth to the Select Board several times with updates, and they have since presented a finished and final document. So that'll be available as Appendix A and in this document, and will be on file with the Town Clerk's Office. Article 21, Floodplain Zoning Bylaw, which requires a 2/3 majority vote because it's relative to zoning. The floodplain map has been updated, and so we're just doing that as a matter of housekeeping. Article 22, Surplus Town Properties, the police station, otherwise known as 65 North Main Street. There have been several public discussions surrounding this property in particular, and it seems the consensus is to sell the property, and so we're asking the people of Middleton to authorize the select board to dispose of that property sometime after the police department vacates it, obviously. Article 23, conservation restriction for 105 South Main Street. We are still awaiting finalizing some language with legal counsel, and also awaiting a survey, which we anticipate to have in time, based on conversations we have with them today.
Just as a detail on Article 22, I do think you should just add in the thing.
A purpose?
I know it's obvious, but
Yeah.
that once the police vacate it, just, you know.
So that we don't
I
evict
know,
people
so
for it.
I would put in the purpose that we committed to use funds from these buildings toward the facilities project. That was a commitment we made. I think that would be the purpose, is that way we went for the override, we committed to use funds for any buildings that we sold. toward
To
the
clarify,
project.
it would be for the debt service
Right,
payments
right, right,
of the
right.
municipal complex.
right.
It's not to actually offset the project itself.
Right. Well, it is, but it's,
It depends on how we do it. If we actually sell it before we bond for that additional,
true.
it may just reduce the size of the bond, right?
Right, it would be going towards the borrowing.
Yeah.
One way or another, either
But
paying
might
the
be
payment
able to borrow
reduction
less
or
if we get the money for
reducing.
that before we do the last.
We'll draft up some appropriate language.
On the charter review,
you, Peter.
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, but net, whatever it is, the point is, if we get that money, whatever it is that the, you know, whether it's the bond or the cost, it still defrays
Right.
the
Minimize
amount of
the-
money that. the-
Right, I mean,
Yep.
it might be a few years out because it still has to legally close to free cash, and then from there, we can appropriate the funds, because it's just technically how it needs to happen, but
But I
yes.
think that would sell, I mean, it would just make people
Yeah,
feel a little
yeah.
more like, oh, look, they really are using the
Doing what we
money
said
to
we were gonna
help
do, yeah.
defray the costs.
So I'll be broad about the mechanism in terms of
Yeah.
how we do it, but what we intend to do. I'll
Clear
be
that the-
abundantly
The
clear.
ultimate benefit is to reduce the expense of the obligation of the taxpayers to pay for the municipal complex. That's
Correct.
Do we have the final charter review? The final ones that are gonna go in here?
Yep, so we are in the process of converting it to red line format.
Okay, when do you think we'll have that?
Sorry to put you on the
I
spot with a
committed to the Charter Review
glance.
Committee to get it to them on Monday, to the co-chairs. So, soon,
Okay,
I'm gonna offer.
Early next week.
I don't wanna time limit them. I wanna give them a couple of days to review my work, so by the end of the week, next week, for sure.
But I thought it had to get to the printer we were talking about with the
Yes.
school committees.
But your
doesn't-
vote, yes, and it will still meet the printer deadline.
Okay.
But it's all voted on, whereas you voting
Right.
changes other
Okay.
things that we have to update. It's a trickle-down effect,
Okay,
unfortunately.
we just want to see it, that's all.
No, I understand, and
Okay,
I want it to be correct before you get it.
okay, thanks.
We'll make sure you get eyes on it.
Jeff, but there's been no change since the document. They did, the track changes is all that I'm doing. The rest of that other document is still going to be as the charter committee put it together and provided to you.
Wasn't there something, Trevor, that we picked up on?
So there's the version where they outline the change and the why that you already have. That hasn't changed. All I'm doing is taking that and applying it to the charter's track changes. So you do have all the changes in that document, just not as a track changes document.
Okay, because I
There's
thought,
been no change since what you've seen.
I know what you're talking about, Jeff, and that will
okay, all right.
But to be clear for anybody watching at home, the only changes being made are relative to format, not to substance.
Right.
So those are the 23 articles and concludes the reading of the warrant. So if there aren't any additional questions, Mr. Chair, that brings us to item 2B on the agenda.
2B, review and discuss fiscal year '26 operating and capital budgets.
Thank you, sir. So there have been some updates, obviously, since the Finance Committee and Select Board had an opportunity for a joint meeting back on March 1st. There have also been some additional meetings between that point and now, including some Select Board meetings, as well as recently, the past 2 Mondays, some Finance Committee meetings. And we've had some significant progress. So I believe the last time we left off as a group, we were looking at roughly a little over a $600,000 deficit on the town side of things for fiscal year '26. We've since managed to make up some ground on some of those items, as we've explained recently in the Finance Committee meetings. It's typical to see a lot of movement in May, and the reason being some of our larger budget drivers really don't settle and come down to earth until about mid to late March. I think I just said May, but mid to late March. And those items have since settled, so that includes conversations surrounding the budget with Masco, with the elementary school, some scrutinization of our health insurance number and trying to get that number tightened up. And now that those items have settled, we've also had some conversations about potential shifts to our existing financial policies relative to excess levy, which is going to come up next on the agenda following the discussion surrounding the budget and any changes. So at this point in time, and I'm going to hand it over to Sarah in a minute, we did take the feedback from the Select Board at your March 18th meeting relative to using that excess levy capacity. We had proposed departing from holding the 1% and bringing it down to 0.5%. Based on feedback from the Select Board, they challenged us to try to get it to using only 0.25%, which we have succeeded in doing. And so with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah, who's going to walk you through some of the financial gymnastics and kind of highlight how we got from there to here.
Thank you. So as of our 3-1 meeting, as Justin said, we were in a deficit of between roughly $670,000 to $700,000. I don't remember exactly at this point. The numbers have changed so much in the last 27 days. At this point in time, however, if we keep our levy capacity at the 1%, we are still in a deficit of $102,958, which is why we are still proposing using additional excess levy capacity. At this point, if we use an additional 25%, so keeping 0.75% of our excess levy capacity, we will be in a surplus of $13,247, which is a little tighter than I would honestly like to be, but it is a balanced budget. To get there, the town made about $150,000 worth of cuts, as was mentioned and outlined in the memo to the Select Board and the Finance Committee last week. Part of this also from our March 1st meeting to now, was finalizing the elementary school budgets, where they are coming in currently at, let me pull it up on the sheet. 16,188,120. That is in our operating budget. That's with that override number, additionally of 537, roughly. In addition, that the decision was made to level fund the Masco budget, putting any increase into the override. We were working with the towns of Topsfield and Boxford in order to get on the same page as to what everyone will have within the operating budget. This does put Masco's increase at roughly a 4.27% increase overall. The assessment would increase 3% based on their income and things like that. And that puts our override at roughly, I don't have it here,
For Masco?
Masco.
467,000 and change.
I just wanted to point out that Boxford and Topsfield had asked Masco to limit their budget increase to 2% plus insurance, which would have translated to about a 3.25 increase. And because of the assessment formula, that would have reduced our assessment.
Correct.
And therefore, were able to convince Topsfield and Boxford to add to their initial guidance, and all of us target a 4.27% budget increase.
Correct. Because it was, conversations that town administration and me had, it didn't make sense to reduce the assessment to Masco and put more money into the override for Middleton specifically. It just didn't seem like a good fiscal policy to have. So luckily, we were able to convince the other towns to try to get to that point where Middleton is basically at a zero. I think it honestly is a $4 change at that point. And I think it's a decrease of $4, so we won't, if the override fails, the $4 is not an issue. But at that point, that makes the override to be that $467,000.
We have to change the number by $4. Because we moved the same number across. So it should be 802 instead of 806.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure, good.
I just want your comment that if the override fails, it won't be a big deal. It will be a big deal. We would have to cut $1.4 million out of our budget to get Middleton's assessment down.
I was talking about the $4. I wasn't talking
I know,
about.
I just want to make sure that.
I wasn't
that's
talking about the
clear.
overall aspect. I'm sorry if it came off that way, Trevor. I did not mean it
No, I just
in that
wanted-
way.
For everyone at home, just wanted to. Thank you.
And quickly, if I could interject just to speak to this issue, because there was a correspondence that was distributed this afternoon relative to this topic. And just to further underscore, regional school districts are complicated. And I think it makes what's already a very challenging job for the Masco School District that much more difficult in terms of articulating to the general public what certain things mean, especially when it comes to the finances of the situation. And I think having, basing the budget off a 5-year rolling average, depending on how many Middleton residents are actually enrolled at Masco, is something that can really cause significant shifts from year to year, even with the 5-year rolling average. And so in full recognition that in future years, when there is a time that Middleton will see a surge in enrollment, our proportion of that assessment will reflect that, and budgetarily we'll get absolutely slammed. That's just a reality. The other side of that coin, though, is years when there's a dip in enrollment, which we have seen recently. If it were a true level fund on the Middleton side, it would have been a negative $277,000 contribution in the budget this year, which would have made our job way easier in terms of budgeting the town side. That was something that was proposed to us. It's obviously a partnership between the towns of Topsfield and Boxford. Topsfield is in a difficult situation this year, the first to tell you that in a public meeting. I'm not telling tales outside of school here. They had $195,000 available in their levy limit to fund Masco this year. And so in some of the early conversations we'd had with the three communities, we were being asked to fund at a negative $277,000 in an effort to help the other communities, and we pushed back on that. So I understand the frustration coming from Masco and the folks that are, fighting the good fight over there. It's a difficult budget year, and they've made some really challenging decisions under an immense amount of pressure, both from the good folks that work at Masco, but students and their parents as well. It's not an easy job. But I just want to underscore, it's not us and a lack of commitment to partnership. We want to see everybody succeed here.
Charlie?
Also, just like to underscore that this is different than how we've historically funded Masco. Historically, Masco, the town has agreed to include 2.5% of the Middleton assessment in the omnibus budget. To the best of my knowledge, that's how we've operated. And so when looking at what our assessment is, it's at like 4.7, I believe. That's almost half. So in my mind, our override was going to be half what it is now. And I didn't learn about that until the night before we were set to vote on our budget at your previous Tuesday meeting. And so what we have now is 99.99% of Middleton's assessment increase is put on an override. I mean, I just don't see any other department or budget in this omnibus budget getting a $346 increase. So that's the way I see it. I understand, but I don't know where we turned, and now that this is the approach we're taking to funding Masco.
Well, I mean, Masco has always, as long as I've been paying attention to that issue, said that, we can't, when towns have complained about their assessment increase, the response is, we can't control that. We can only control the budget. Well, the budget at a 4.27% increase leaves the assessment for Middleton flat. So I don't really see it as a change. It's because this year, for a variety of factors, some of it enrollment driven, some from the state SNAT school spending, numbers, we're paying a very low percentage of the assessment, increase, and that keeps us flat.
I just think, going back to you a few meetings ago, we're talking about building capacity in our budget, and this quite frankly does the opposite, because we know next year is going to be tough for us. And so we want to look ahead like everyone always asks us to do. This does quite exactly the opposite of building capacity by increasing our omnibus budget by $346.
No, your budget capacity is based on your, whatever the budget is approved at, right? You've asked, if the follow through on the omnibus budget is a 4.2%, increase, if the overrides fail, yes, if two of the three towns don't approve the override, you got to cut, from where you were. But for next year, it's whatever your approved budget is times whatever your budget increase is. Now, because of your loss of revenue, every town's assessment will be considerably higher than 2.5 or 3%. So it's, the loss of revenue that's going to hurt you, not capacity.
And then just one last item on there, because there was reference that the folks at Masco had heard of it was the 18th, and I just wanted to clarify that in an effort to be proactive, there was a group including one select board representative, one finance committee representative, and the town administrator from all three towns that had been meeting well in advance of that date, and attended a Masco meeting to outline some of the financial struggles that we were seeing on the municipal side of things. And I would also offer that I joined Kevin Hartunian and Matt Coogan, the respective town administrators in Topsfield and Boxford, at Dr. Harvey's office on February 25th and outlined the same guidance. And so it seems like there was potentially some type of communication breakdown there, and for that I apologize. But it's certainly not the town's, once again, failing our commitment to this partnership. We made a good faith effort to be partners here this year. And once again, genuinely, we want to see everybody succeed.
In addition, moving on to the revenue side of things, since our last meeting, our Q3 meals excise tax came in, so I have increased our excise tax revenue 25,000 to be a total of 325,000 for FY '26. Projecting out this fiscal year, I expect to be around $340,000 worth of revenue, but I never match those revenues, so increasing it slightly to 325,000. And I also looked at our hotel excise tax that we receive. It's trending kind of on par with where we were at last year. So we should receive about 260,000 of that revenue this year, and in the budget we have 225,000. So I'm confident with those numbers that we have within the budget. In addition, I made a slight increase to our interest on deposits line item of 15,000 to bring that up to $190,000. As of February 28th, our investment income that or interest income we've received on our recurring revenue has been about 458,000. So I think increasing it modestly to that 190 still gives us plenty of room in case things happen within the market. But for the most part, the money that we are earning this money on is from our lockbox and just getting really, honestly, decent interest rates with those. That I believe Nick is at your meeting on Tuesday that he can speak to in a lot more detail than I can. In addition, there was a slight increase to our Water Enterprise Fund indirect costs. When I got the insurance breakdown from our insurance providers, there was a small increase in their share of workers' comp and things like that. So that was a modest increase of $476. And then bringing in also that utilization of the Special Education Stabilization Fund to offset the changes in the elementary school budget. That is all I had for updates on the operating, unless there's anything else you wanted me to get into.
Does anybody have any questions relative to the operating budget?
I don't.
Sped, you went to the exact number John gave you.
133, 145, yes.
Okay.
Move on to capital then?
Yeah,
or-
so moving on to capital, one significant change that we saw recently that I communicated was that the $2.2 million for the Fuller Meadow roof, just based on guidance from the MSBA, we are postponing until the fiscal 27 cycle. And I don't know if anybody from the schools would like to speak to that, but just given the way the timeline maps out, it would give us an opportunity to go through the design phase, which we had just kicked off, and it's going to give us a firmer opinion of probable costs, which then we can bring to town meeting rather than the 2.2 million, which was merely an estimate.
And this is different than accepting the invitation, which we have to do within a certain.
Yeah, that was
Because
only.
we already accepted the invitation, so we're just finalizing, getting the good numbers. Okay.
Yep, and the town has already authorized us to borrow the 300,000 to do this initial study at the last town meeting in May. So there'll be plenty of funds within that bucket of money to move forward until the point in time in May.
You don't have to show them that you have the money in place for our share to get the grants?
No match or anything like that? or-
No, it's not a grant. I mean, it's from the, I mean, it is, but it isn't.
reimbursement.
It's a reimbursement, honestly, more than a grant. But no, you don't need to. I think as long as things move forward and everything, goes in the timeline that it should, there's no problems.
By the time we go out to bid, we would need to have
Yes.
the town's match in hand, but there's plenty of time. And this was something that was initiated by the elementary schools. It's not
Okay.
something that we're.
As long as as long as that's what,
Yeah, I mean, Scott and Steve can speak better to it, but I've been following along with the emails and the timeline and everything, and it seems that next year is the year where it needs to be on the warrant.
okay.
And then one other, I guess, capital item of note that's not necessarily on the plan for fiscal '26, but is a departure from prior years, is the $75,000 that we typically hold in the operating budget for the purposes of purchasing a new police cruiser is going to be slid over to the capital planning process, but not starting until next year for fiscal year '27. And the reasoning for that is we've gotten into a cycle of replacing a cruiser every year, which typically is a good practice because you don't want to wait too long or let your fleet get too old and then you're on the hook for buying a whole new fleet all at once. But this decision to postpone for this year in particular was supported by Chief Sampson in so many words to paraphrase. With the override coming up, we wanted to make every good faith effort to the Middleton taxpayer that we're tightening the belt anywhere we can, and Chief would rather see another officer than a new squad car. So we appreciate the sacrifice there from the PD.
And within the cut of 150,000, that's, how much of that is the?
75,000.
75, oh, I thought it was 50, okay.
No, it's
More than I
75,000.
thought.
And then the remainder of that $150,000 was surgical cuts, 10,000, 2,000 here and there throughout the budget once again, so that, we can look the Middleton taxpayer in the eye and tell them we're not asking for a dime that we don't need. So.
Good. Any questions on capital?
I do not.
The only thing I will say is with both the operating and the capital budget warrant articles, those are both 2/3 votes because there's the use of stabilization funds in both the omnibus budget as well as the capital budget. And then capital also has the borrowing in that as well. So it's a little bit of a complex warrant article, which is why this year you can see there's funding sources added within the capital warrant article just to kind of really exemplify and kind of explain to people where the funding sources are coming from and which ones have that special restriction around the 2/3 vote.
And the only ballot articles will be that the two schools, if they don't join, and the police and fire combined. Three, that's the only thing that has to go to the ballot, right?
Absolutely.
3 in total, and it's listed on the back page of the warrant.
Thanks.
All right. Then I guess on to D. There's no further discussion to review the joint, sorry?
Need a motion on the
Oh, I'm sorry.
purchase levy?
Yes, that would be C.
So just a quick review of the financial policies relative to excess levy. I already touched on it a little bit, but just to come around to formalize the conversation, Jackie, Sarah, and I, but to credit mostly Jackie, have been drafting together some language, which is up here on the screen, just trying to take the feedback that we've received from the Finance Committee and the Select Board. There wasn't total consistency in terms of opinions at the table, but enough that we could kind of get some consensus there. And we think, is there a way to blow that up a little bit? Sorry.
No, I can't see it.
There's a lot of glasses at this table. Although Jeff, you're going strong over there.
I can
huh?
see far away. If the whole meeting was that far away, I wouldn't have to bring my glasses.
Okay, is that better?
Yes, thank you. So I'm just going to read this whole block verbatim, so bear with me real quickly because I know for some people it's at their back. So it's in our financial policies, number 6, excess levy capacity. So existing language is the town shall have a goal of maintaining excess levy capacity of at least 1% of current year budgeted general fund operating appropriation in order to have tax capacity to pay for future fixed costs and excessive inflation, provide needed and desired services, and maintain flexibility to react and respond to changes in the economy with less measurable financial stress. What we're looking to add here based on conversations that we've had is that in the event that an operating override is expected in the fiscal year being budgeted, the town shall reduce the excess levy capacity retained to 0.25.
That may reduce instead of shall.
Yeah, may,
Okay.
not shall.
Can edit on the fly here.
Real time.
Yep. May reduce the excess levy capacity retained to 0.25 of the current budgeted general fund operating appropriation prior to calculation of the override. When the amount is reduced, thank you, due to an operating override, the Select Board and Finance Committee must also adopt a 3-year plan to return the budgeted amount of excess levy capacity to 1% as stated above. The plan can be amended but must be reauthorized every year until the town has returned to 1% of excess levy capacity.
Very good.
So the plan may be amended. And offer one more complication or permutation. That it would take, to reduce it to 0.5%, it would take a majority vote of the Select Board and FinCom. To go from 0.5 to 0.25, it takes 2/3 of each body, and to go to 0 has to be unanimous. This way, as I've been thinking about this, having excess levy capacity without a mechanism to be able to use it in times of need is like not having it. And we should have a mechanism, particularly very difficult to achieve, but still a mechanism to get down to 0. So all 5 Select Board members and 7 FinCom members would have to agree to get down to 0. The further you cut, the more of a majority, the more of a need has to be demonstrated. So I think that shows that, we take the responsibility to dip into it, seriously, but we have a mechanism to use all of it if circumstances dictate.
The only thing, Costa, if you had a member that wasn't available,
Well, yeah, it's,
FY
still
26
need
budget,
the
we couldn't vote on
majority.
that under this premise right now, but
No.
I don't have a full quorum.
Right.
right, it maybe unanimous of everyone in attendance, but
yeah, no, I'm saying the whole, but, it's in attendance,
Yeah,
not,
in
not,
attendance, yeah.
But that's true all the
If you're
time. It's
just-
whoever's
right.
there gets to count.
And for clarification, is it of the entire body present or separate majorities per committee?
per committee.
Per committee.
So like, to get from 0.5 to 0.25, where it needs 2/3, you would need 4 Select Board members.
so both bodies individually.
It
You're saying
can be,
individually.
it can be either or.
So,
So
It's gotta
Costa,
say one or
in
the
this
other.
instance where we only need to utilize and dip down to 0.75,
It's a majority.
Just the majority.
Of each body.
and for the benefit of anybody watching at home that hasn't had an opportunity to watch some of the budget deliberations we've had throughout the year, the genesis for this conversation was a hesitance on our part to request an override of the voters while still holding back a sum of money in hand. And so we're trying to minimize that. The excess levy capacity itself isn't town money specifically. It's used to fund the municipal budget at times, but also often and sometimes in higher amounts, school budgets over the past few years. But it's the town's people's money, and that's the important piece. So we do like to try to defend some of that, just as a bit of a security blanket in instances of an economic downturn or something like that.
So this is just to modify the wording of that policy.
Correct.
We're not, this has nothing.
Then we have to vote for FY 26, whether
Right,
we
this
want
is
to
just
use.
for the policy going forward.
But that part where it says new, it has to be more specific, because it's vague. Is it a majority vote of everyone here, or is it a majority vote of, it has to state out, is it a majority vote individually or collectively of the two
I wrote
boards?
a vote of each body, majority vote of
Right, each
each
committee.
body. Yeah, to your
Oh,
point.
yeah. So,
What if you wrote each committee, Jackie? Was that more,
Well, one's a board, one's a
There
committee.
you go.
That's how the sausage is made, you know?
I think the unanimous might be too restrictive.
Well, if we get down to zero, I think.
It's an obvious.
It
I
would
think for
have to
zero,
be.
it should
You know,
be,
that's why-
Well, I don't know if I can say
Unanimous?
anything. For zero, it should be unanimous.
You would think.
You've
That's
gotta
why I
retain-
understand.
I mean, it's gotta be such a crisis to maintain zero levy excess capacity.
But to have 12, a vote of 11 to, was it 12 people between, to have a vote of 11 to 1 and it can't happen, you could have one person that doesn't fully understand, you could have a rogue person, that's taking a big chance.
There could be one person in the group, right, to Jeff's point, that could just come in and just tank the whole thing.
Yeah.
But, we're
that's
talking
unforeseen.
about going from 0.5 to zero.
zero,
So,
I think
if-
zero should be like
very hard to
the
get to.
nuclear option there. I mean,
Yep.
you should really,
Two sets
it
of
has to
keys
be
and-
so obvious to everybody
It-
that it's gonna be unanimous.
So
And I think, that should tell the town something too, that when you're that, when
And-
going that
and I-
close, and we're not leaving it open to
willy-nilly, right?
somebody to, yeah.
And so one other element of this conversation that I think is helpful is internally we went back and I created a chart and then Sarah found one that already existed from the state that's way better. So here it is up on the screen here. But some of the conversation we had had relative to excess levy capacity.
Cool.
Was, well, what other towns are doing
Oh,
this?
yeah.
And what does it look like? And so this appropriately titled page here from the DLS, Trends in Excess Levy Capacity, shows you overall in kind of a heat map format what the rest of the Commonwealth looks like. So very large, deep, and generous excess levy capacities are represented in dark green, and then they fade out into yellow as you go along. So
So what's
Jackie, if
the,
you could unclick on Middleton in that state graph.
Can't read those numbers.
yeah,
either.
I'm working on it, guys. It's
just click in the white, click in the ocean. Just click in the ocean. There we go. Thank you. So, so as you can see, it is typical for communities to not hold large sums of excess levy capacity. It helps put you at ease. There are some outliers, some which we think actually might be errors. The severely dark green ones are with like $20-30 million for a community where it just wouldn't make sense.
Or just lack of data, maybe from them.
It could be,
Yeah,
yeah.
it could be. But I think this provides a pretty good representation of what we're looking at. And the other important part is the history of the use of levy. So now that we're getting to the bottom of what we have in hand, it feels, a little bit tighter. But you can actually see year over year, partly cut off there, but that bar graph showing that inconsistent amounts, more or less, at a relatively consistent pace. Middleton has drawn down off of that excess levy capacity to make things work. And this year would just be a continuation of that trend. As it gets lower, obviously, it's like when you get I don't know, pick a sum of anything. I should have had a better example lined up here, but if you have like a bunch of candy, for example, but when you get to the end of it, you're like a little more, fickle with how you use it and whether or not you're gonna eat it, I think is probably a horrible analogy. I'll dream up something better, but not in my highlight reel. But by example, like when you have a ton there, I think you're a little less restrictive with it. And when you get towards the end, you start really kind of nursing it down. So I think an important statistic anyway for the community to have as well, just to not be in a panic.
Is this just are we gonna be in the same boat next year, and should we really deal with the problem that we have, then because if it's just gonna be the same problem next year.
I think by adding the language into our policy, it helps us to not have to revisit amending the policy every single year. If we amend it this one time and it's there for us for future years, whether or not we need it, I think it's still good to have the
available.
mechanism there. Yes, it helps us this year. Will it help us next year? It could. The year after, it could. It all depends. I mean, we are seeing a downturn in growth and a lot of other things that's not helping add to our excess levy.
So do you believe we'll get back to the 1% in a
I mean,
couple
I
of
already
years?
in my model have 1% back next year. By dipping only into 0.25, it's a lot easier to go back to the 1%. But again, that's just my current model that I have. Again, as we all know, it's in a deficit for next year. But you never know how the numbers actually shake out. I mean, every year we start the budget, it's always in a deficit. Some years it works out where we get to a balanced budget without overrides, some years not so much. But I think amending the policy to give us the opportunity and the availability to factor in and do different models and see with the budget at 0.75, 0.5, 0.25, what does the budget look like? It just makes it a little bit easier to kind of forecast.
So I will move to adopt this policy.
Can I
Oh.
make one very quick note? Costa, you had given me more use for the lower majority, so it's 0.75. To reduce it to 0.75, so only using 0.25 would require the majority vote, but then to use 0.5 would require a 2/3.
No.
Because you want it to be 2/3.
To go from 1 to 0.5 is a majority.
Okay.
To go from 0.5 to 0.25 is
It's
2/3.
two-thirds.
To go from 0.25 to 0 is unanimous.
Not what we had originally, so I just wanted, that's what it is, that's what you want it to be.
That's what I
There.
proposed.
I mean,
It may not be what I typed because you were going fast, so I just want to be clear.
should we just have it say to reduce the excess levy up to 0.5%? Because, I mean, it could be anywhere in between in
Yeah.
order to actually balance it. Like at this point with 0.75, I'm in a surplus of 12,000. I'm going to adjust it so it's not the full 0.75 that I'm using to actually have a balanced budget, but.
And I would just offer, as well, not to rush people out of the room, but as I looked across the room, I was like, there's a lot of people from the ZBA here tonight. Jogged my memory.
Go to the cafeteria. So this is our announcement that
Oh.
we'll be conducting the zoning board of appeals hearing in the cafeteria.
We're actually like wrapping
We're
right now.
done.
Okay. We're wrapping now, though, if you want the room.
Why don't we,
Yeah.
why don't we wait? Because we have the AV here, right?
Yeah, I
Yes.
only have one AV person.
All right, so,
AV, so
so there was a motion to approve this?
Yes,
Was there a
there's a
second?
motion, I second.
Perfect. How's that vote looking?
Of these individual board votes?
Yeah.
Yes,
All right.
please.
Well, for the select board first, we have motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Done. Passed unanimously.
So do I have a motion from someone in the fire?
Motion to approve this
I'll second.
amendment.
Second. Have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Aye. Unanimous.
They're gonna use those for the
Oh,
ZBA.
that's right.
So
We
now
just take
I'll
our
make a
name
motion per the policy to go down to 0.75% in FY '26, 0.85% in FY '27, and back to 1 in FY '28. That's the three-year plan of the,
Policy.
that is referred to in the policy.
I'll second that.
All right, motion and second. Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Done. Passed
Now you have
unanimously.
to,
All right, so that's a motion for the FinCom?
Someone can say so moved.
I'll motion
I'll
to
second.
approve it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yes.
We were still
Is there a
Is there a motion?
motion to adjourn?
Well, we
Take care of
just
minutes
quickly
at
the
your,
minutes? Yeah.
You haven't,
we're gonna
those are
do,
not ready for you, I'm
we're
sorry.
gonna take
You
care of
should
minutes
not
at your
have
next
gotten
meeting.
those. I apologize.
So is there a motion?
Motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
All right.
Second.
Put it on your.
Thank
All
you,
in
everyone.
favor?
Adjourn.
Those are-